Right now, somewhere in America, a gardener is loading up a cart at a garden center with plants they already own. Coleus at $6 a pot, Russian sage at $9, butterfly bushes at $16, sometimes $22 if there is a trademark on the tag, boxwoods at $30 or $40 a piece for something barely a foot tall. And the cashier will ring it all up with a smile, because it is not their job to mention that every one of those plants is standing in that gardener's own backyard right now, in the form of stems that would root in a few weeks for the cost of absolutely nothing. There is no commission for teaching you independence. There is only a commission on the next sale. The entire retail nursery model in this country is built on one quiet assumption, that you will keep coming back, spring after spring, wallet open, cart empty, ready to buy again what winter took, or what you wish you had more of. Today we are shutting that revolving door. Before we go any further, type your U.S. state or your USDA hardiness zone into the comments. I read them all, and I use them to decide what this channel covers next, because the advice that works in Georgia is not always the advice that works in Minnesota, and I want to build content around where this community actually gardens. Here is the part most home gardeners never hear. August is one of the best-kept secrets in plant propagation. By late summer, this season's growth has firmed up into what propagators call semi-ripe wood, stems that are mature enough to resist rot, but still young enough to fire out roots. The heat is starting to back off, humidity is still high, and there are weeks of warm soil left for young roots to establish before fall. Professional growers time enormous production runs to this exact window. The home gardener, meanwhile, has usually been told that propagation is something you do in spring, or something that requires a greenhouse, or something for experts. None of that is true. And the proof is that commercial nurseries take millions of cuttings in August with unskilled seasonal labor and succeed at rates above 90%, using nothing more sophisticated than what I am going to show you today. 7 plants. That is what we are covering, with the exact stem to look for on each one, the medium that works, the named varieties that root most dependably, the timing down to the week, and the specific mistakes that quietly kill more cuttings than anything else. Stay with me all the way to the end, because the last plant on this list carries the biggest dollar figure of the 7, by a wide margin, and once you see this whole system, your own backyard starts looking like a nursery. One piece of groundwork before plant number 1, because it applies to everything that follows. The single most important physical fact about a cutting is this: it has no roots. That sounds obvious, and yet nearly every failure traces back to forgetting it. A rooted plant pulls water from soil. A cutting cannot. The only moisture a cutting gets, it absorbs through its leaves from humid air, which is why a clear plastic bag or a humidity dome over your cuttings is not a nice extra, it is life support. And the medium the cutting sits in is not there to feed it. A cutting needs no fertilizer, no compost, no rich soil. It needs air at the stem so roots can initiate, and it needs just enough moisture so the stem never dries. That is why the standard mix for almost everything today is half perlite and half quality potting mix, never garden soil. Garden soil compacts, suffocates, and carries disease. Perlite breathes. Keep those 2 principles in your head: humidity above, air below, and half the failures you would have had simply never happen. Plant number 1, coleus. I am starting with coleus because pound for pound, no plant on this list hands the garden center more repeat business for less reason. Those electric foliage plants in lime, burgundy, copper, and near black sell for $5 to $7 in a small pot, and premium branded varieties in larger containers push past $12. Millions of them are bought fresh every single spring because frost wipes them out, and gardeners assume that is simply the deal. It is not the deal. Coleus may be the single easiest plant in American horticulture to reproduce from a cutting, and the fact that this is not printed on every coleus tag in the country tells you something about whose interest those tags serve. Snip a shoot tip 3 to 4 inches long from healthy, actively growing stems. Make your cut just below a node, that slightly swollen joint where leaves attach, because that is where new roots will emerge. Pull off the leaves from the lower half of the stem so nothing green ends up below the surface. Buried foliage rots, and rot moving up a stem is a death sentence for a cutting that has no roots to defend itself with. If the shoot you cut carries a flower spike, those blue-purple towers coleus throws in late summer, pinch it off entirely. A cutting trying to flower is a cutting dividing its energy, and you want every bit of that energy going down, not up. With coleus, you get 2 roots and both work. Root 1 is a simple glass of water on a bright windowsill out of direct afternoon sun. Refresh the water every couple of days so it stays oxygenated, and you will watch white roots appear at the nodes in under 2 weeks during warm weather. Root 2 is sticking the cutting directly into your half perlite, half potting mix blend, with a clear plastic bag over the top to hold humidity. Either way, coleus roots so willingly that no rooting hormone is required, though a light dusting never hurts. If you have children or grandchildren you want to hook on gardening, the water glass method with coleus is the gateway. Roots you can watch forming, day by day, in a plant with leaves that look painted. Nothing sells the magic of propagation faster. Here is the move that changes everything with this plant. Root a batch of cuttings in late August. Pot them up into 4-inch pots once the roots are an inch long, and bring those small plants indoors before your first frost, before night temperatures start dipping below 50 degrees. They sail through winter on a bright windowsill as houseplants. They will get a bit leggy and a bit pale by February. That is fine. That is not failure. That is dormancy in a tropical plant keeping itself alive. In March, pinch them back hard, and here is where it compounds. Every pinch tip is itself a new cutting. Root that second generation, and by the time your frost date passes in spring, you walk outside with 2 or 3 dozen coleus that cost you nothing. The gardener next door is standing in a checkout line at that exact moment, paying $6 apiece for the same plant. Over 10 years, a gardener who buys 8 coleus every spring spends roughly $500 on this one plant. A gardener who buys 1 coleus one time and learns this loop spends $6 total for a decade of color. On varieties, the Kong series gives you dramatic oversized leaves for shade. The Wizard series is a compact classic that holds color beautifully, and the newer sun-tolerant lines like Color Blaze open up spots that older shade coleus could never handle, including full sun beds across most of the country. And remember why cuttings matter here specifically. A cutting is a genetic clone. That one coleus in your bed with the perfect burgundy and lime pattern will be reproduced exactly, leaf for leaf, in every cutting you take from it. Seed cannot make that promise. Seed-grown coleus is a lottery ticket. A cutting is a photocopy, and when you find a pattern you love, the photocopy is what you want. Plant number 2, Russian sage. Russian sage, Perovskia, is having a moment in American landscaping, and the price tags reflect it. A 1-gallon pot commonly runs $10 to $16, and I understand why people pay it. That silvery foliage and that long haze of violet-blue bloom from midsummer into fall is one of the toughest, most drought-proof displays available to a cold-climate gardener, hardy down to Zone 4 and shrugging at Zone 5 winters without a second thought. Deer will not touch it. Rabbits will not touch it. It thrives in the exact hot, dry, miserable strip along a driveway where everything else you have tried has died. What the price tag does not tell you is that late summer is precisely when this plant offers you unlimited free copies of itself. The stem you want is semi-ripe growth from this season. Test it with your fingers. It should bend and spring back, rather than snapping like a green bean or resisting like a twig. That flexible, slightly firmed stage is the sweet spot. And in August, Russian sage is covered in it. Take cuttings 4 inches long from non-flowering side shoots, and if every shoot on the plant is blooming, which by August is often the case, do this instead. Cut a few stems back by half and wait roughly 2 weeks. The plant will respond by pushing fresh vegetative growth from below the cuts, and that fresh push is premium cutting material, soft enough to root eagerly, hydrated, and carrying 0 flower commitment. Take your cuttings in the morning. I want to say a word about this because it applies to every plant today, and it is one of those small habits that separates 70% success from 30%. Overnight, a plant rehydrates fully because it is not losing water through its leaves in the dark. At 7 in the morning, every cell in that stem is plump with water. By 3 in the afternoon on an August day, the same stem is running a water deficit even though it looks fine. A cutting taken in the afternoon starts its rooting journey already behind, and it may never catch up. Morning cuttings, into a plastic bag with a damp paper towel, prepared within the hour. Make it a ritual. Strip the lower leaves, dip the base in rooting hormone powder, and here is the adjustment that matters. Russian sage is a plant of dry, gritty, sun-blasted ground, and its cuttings despise a soggy medium more than almost anything else I will show you today. Lean your mix heavily toward perlite, 70% or more, or use straight perlite if you have it. A cutting does not need fertility. It needs air around the developing stem and humidity around the leaves, and a plastic cover handles the humidity while the perlite handles the air. Set the pot in bright shade, a north-facing porch, under a patio table, the bright side of a garage, and resist the urge to keep it wet. Barely moist winds. If you squeeze a handful of the medium and water drips out, it is too wet for this plant. Expect roots in 4 to 6 weeks, confirmed with a gentle tug test at the 1-month mark. Grip the cutting lightly between 2 fingers and pull with about the force you would use to lift a tea bag. If it resists, roots have anchored into the medium. If it slides free, slide it back and give it another week or 2. Whatever you do, do not pull cuttings out to inspect the roots. Every inspection tears the microscopic root hairs that are doing the actual work and sets the cutting back days. For named selections, Little Spire stays a tidy 2 feet and does not flop, which solves the #1 complaint people have about the species. Denim and lace is even more compact with unusually dense flower spikes and has become the standard recommendation for smaller yards. Blue Jean Baby blooms earlier than most, stretching the season by weeks. Run the numbers the way we always do on this channel. One established Russian sage will give you 10 or more viable cuttings in an August session without the parent plant even looking like it was touched. At $12 a pot retail, that is $120 of landscape material from 20 minutes of work. And here is the design payoff hiding inside the economics. Russian sage looks good as 1 plant and looks spectacular as 7, planted in a drift. Almost nobody plants it in drifts, because 7 plants at the garden center is $84 plus tax, and the cart goes back. When the plants are free, you design differently. You mass things. Your garden starts looking like the photographs, and the only thing that changed is that you stopped paying retail. Plant number 3, butterfly bush. Butterfly bush buddleia is one of the highest margin shrubs on the garden center lot. A branded variety in a 2-gallon pot regularly crosses $20, and the newer dwarf lines command even more. Meanwhile, this shrub roots from summer cuttings almost as fast as you can prepare them. Growers know it. That is exactly how they produce them, by the tens of thousands, sticking unrooted cuttings by the tray in late summer and shipping rooted plants the following season. The only person left out of that knowledge is the customer, who is charged $22 for a plant that began 12 months earlier as a 4-inch stem worth nothing. In August, you are looking for semi-ripe shoots from the current season, 4 to 6 inches long, taken from stems that are not carrying a flower spike. This is the same principle we come back to again and again on this channel. A stem that is blooming has already spent its budget. Every bit of energy in that shoot is committed to flowers and seed, and asking it to also build a root system is asking it to do 2 full-time jobs at once. It will do neither. Choose the leafy, vigorous shoots lower on the shrub, or deadhead a few spent spikes, and harvest the fresh growth that appears in the following 2 weeks. Butterfly bush carries fairly large leaves for a cutting, so borrow the trick that professionals use on every big-leaved subject. Take clean scissors and trim each remaining leaf in half, crosswise. It looks brutal the first time you do it, and it is the kindest thing you can do for that cutting, because every square inch of leaf surface is losing water to the air through transpiration, and a rootless cutting cannot pay that bill. Cut the leaf area in half, and you cut the water demand roughly in half, while leaving plenty of green tissue to power root formation. This one habit, leaf reduction on large-leaved cuttings, will raise your success rate more than any product you can buy. Cut just below a node, strip the lower foliage, apply rooting hormone, and set the cutting an inch deep in your perlite blend under a plastic cover in bright, indirect light. One warning that matters in August, specifically. Never let a plastic-covered propagation tray sit in direct sun, not even morning sun if it is intense in your region. A clear bag in sunlight is a greenhouse the size of a loaf of bread, and the temperature inside can pass 120 degrees in minutes and cook every cutting in it. Bright shade, always. Under those conditions, butterfly bush roots typically show in 3 to 4 weeks, which is remarkably fast for a shrub. Variety selection with Buddleia matters for a reason beyond looks. In several states, particularly in the Pacific Northwest, older seeding varieties are classified as invasive because they escape into wild areas and crowd out native plants. The modern sterile and near-sterile lines solve this problem completely, and they happen to be superb garden plants. The Pugster series delivers full-sized flower heads on a 2-foot dwarf frame, hardy to zone 5, small enough for containers. The Lo and Behold series stays compact and blooms continuously without deadheading. Miss Molly brings the closest thing to true red the genus offers, and Black Knight is the classic deep violet workhorse if seeding varieties are legal and appropriate where you live. Notice what sterility means for our purposes. A sterile plant produces no viable seed, which means cuttings are not just the best way to reproduce it, they are the only way it has ever been reproduced. Every pugster in America is a cutting of a cutting of a cutting. When you root one yourself, you are not doing amateur horticulture. You are doing exactly what the wholesale grower did, minus the invoice. Let me pause here and ask you something plainly. Think back over your last 3 gardening seasons and estimate what you handed to garden centers for plants that this channel could have shown you how to make yourself. Not everything. Nobody propagates everything. Just the coleus you rebought, the shrubs you added, the perennials that did not make it and got replaced. For most people watching, that figure sits comfortably in the hundreds of dollars, and for some of you it is more than that, and you know exactly who you are. Every week I publish content with one purpose, keeping that money in your pocket while your garden gets bigger, not smaller. Subscribing is free. It takes one tap, and it is the difference between catching that content and missing it. Hit the button and let's keep moving, because the next plant is one your grandmother knew how to do this with, using a technique so old it has its own name. Plant number 4, dianthus. Dianthus, the garden pinks, with those blue-gray mats of grassy foliage and clove-scented flowers in pink, rose, white, and crimson, sells for $6 to $9 a pot and has been quietly bankrolling nurseries for generations. It is one of the most dependable edging perennials in the American garden, evergreen in most zones, blooming heavily in late spring with rebloom if you shear it, fragrant enough to stop people on a path. What has been forgotten along the way is that dianthus comes with its own built-in propagation method, one so old that gardeners in the 1800s gave it its own name. Pipings. Here is how a piping works, and it is almost embarrassingly simple. Find a fresh, non-flowering shoot on your dianthus. Hold the stem firmly just below a node with one hand. Grip the leafy tip with the other, and pull straight up. The shoot slides cleanly out of the node like a sword drawn from a sheath, and what you are holding is a perfect natural cutting. No blade required, no crushed tissue, no ragged wound, a clean base that is primed to root because the plant essentially pre-built the separation point. Victorian gardeners propagated entire borders of pinks this way, hundreds of plants, and the method has not been improved in a century and a half because it did not need to be. Take pipings 2 to 3 inches long, strip the lowest pair of leaves, and insert them an inch deep into gritty, fast-draining mix. Dianthus, like Russian sage, resents wet feet, so keep the perlite generous, and if you have a little coarse sand, dianthus is the plant that appreciates it blended in. Rooting hormone is optional here, genuinely optional. Pipings root well without it. A plastic cover for the first 2 weeks helps in dry climates and in air-conditioned homes, though pinks are among the more forgiving subjects on this list, and many gardeners root them in an open tray in bright shade with nothing but consistent light moisture. In August warmth, expect rooted pipings in 3 to 4 weeks, and here is the timing beauty of doing this next month specifically. Pipings rooted in August, established through the mild days of September and October, develop a real root system before the ground cools, overwinter as young plants, and bloom for you next spring as if they had always been there. You have lost nothing. There is no waiting year. The variety that belongs in the most American gardens is firewitch, a magenta-flowered, intensely fragrant selection hardy all the way to Zone 3, which won Perennial Plant of the Year and earned every bit of it. If firewitch survives winters in North Dakota, it survives winters where you are. Frosty Fire gives you double red flowers over silver foliage. The Paint the Town series brings raspberry and fuchsia shades with outstanding heat tolerance for gardeners in the South who have watched other pinks melt in July humidity. All of these are named cultivars, which means, and by now you know the chorus, seed will not reproduce them. A packet of dianthus seed gives you a mixed bag of ancestors. A piping gives you firewitch. Exactly, every time, forever. And because dianthus is an edging plant, a plant you naturally want 12 of along a walk, rather than 1 of in a bed, the piping technique is not a curiosity. It is the difference between a $90 edging project and a free one. Plant number 5, stonecrop sedum. The tall border sedums, the autumn joy types, are the plants garden writers reach for when someone asks for a perennial that cannot be killed. They laugh at drought. They feed late-season pollinators in September and October when almost nothing else in the neighborhood is blooming, and if you have never seen an autumn joy covered in honeybees on a warm October afternoon, you have a treat coming. They stand through winter with architectural seed heads that catch snow. They return reliably in Zone 3. Garden centers charge $8 to $12 for them, and in fall, when they are in full bloom on the display tables and absolutely irresistible, They move by the truckload to gardeners who could have made a dozen of them in August for nothing. Sedum cuttings ask for one specific adjustment, and it is the same adjustment required by any succulent, because that is what a sedum is. Do not stick a fresh-cut sedum stem into moist medium. Those thick, fleshy stems are engineered to store water, and a fresh wound pressed into damp mix drinks itself into rot before roots ever form. The failure looks like this. The cutting stands proud for a week. Then the base turns dark and soft. Then the whole thing collapses, and the gardener concludes sedums are hard. Sedums are not hard. The order of operations was wrong. Instead, take your 3 to 4 inch tip cuttings from non-flowering shoots, strip the leaves from the lower half, and then lay the cuttings on a dry tray in the shade and walk away for several hours, even overnight. You are letting the cut end callus, drying and sealing the wound the way a scab seals a cut. After callousing, insert them into barely moist mix, and here is the luxury with this plant. No plastic cover needed at all. Sedum's stored moisture carries it through the rooting period on its own, which makes it the single most forgiving plant on today's list for anyone nervous about humidity management. Water sparingly, only when the medium is fully dry. Keep the tray bright, and roots arrive in 3 to 4 weeks. I will let you in on something even easier. Sedum will root from a single leaf. Pull a healthy leaf cleanly from the stem with a little sideways twist. Let it callus for a day. Lay it flat on top of dry mix, and over the following weeks a miniature plant will sprout from the base of that leaf, complete with its own roots, while the mother leaf slowly shrivels and hands over its resources. It is slower than stem cuttings, and it requires nothing from you but neglect. Children find it magical, and if you garden with grandkids, this is the plant to hand them in August. For varieties, Autumn Joy remains the standard for good reason. Dusty pink flower heads aging to copper and bronze on 2-foot stems. Autumn Fire is an improved selection with sturdier stems that resist the dreaded midsummer flop that splits older clumps open like a donut. Matrona pairs smoky purple stems with pink bloom and is one of the most elegant plants in the late-season garden. And in the creeping types, Angelina spills chartreuse gold foliage over walls and path edges, turns amber in cold weather, and roots from the smallest fragment that touches soil, which is less a propagation technique than a friendly warning about where you drop your trimmings. One established border sedum will hand you 15 or more cuttings in a session. At $10 retail, that is $150 of plant material from the most beginner-proof technique in this entire video. Plant number 6, basil. This is the one that catches people off guard, the same way the surprise entry always does. Basil, the herb you are growing for the kitchen right now, roots from cuttings faster than nearly any ornamental I have covered today. We are talking visible roots in 4 to 6 days in August warmth. Look closely at a basil stem at the nodes, those joints where the leaf pairs attach, and you are looking at tissue that is practically begging for permission to become a new plant. All it needs is water and a windowsill. Snip a 4-inch shoot from a stem that is not flowered. Pull off the lower leaves so no foliage sits underwater. Drop it in a glass of water on the kitchen windowsill, and change the water every 2 days to keep it fresh and oxygenated. Within a week, you will have white roots threading out from the nodes. Within 2 weeks, you will have a root system ready for potting mix or the garden bed. That is the entire technique. No hormone, no dome, no perlite. If flowering has already started on your plants, and by August it usually has, cut below the flower spikes, use the vegetative shoots that follow, and remember that with basil you should be pinching flower spikes anyway, because a basil plant allowed to flower turns its leaves bitter and its stems woody. Propagation and good kitchen management are the same act on this plant. Here is why this matters agriculturally and not just as a trick. By late August, spring-sown basil is tired. It has been fighting to flower for 2 months, the leaves have coarsened, and the flavor has sharpened into something harsher than what you planted in May. A cutting taken now and planted out gives you a brand new, fully tender plant producing sweet young foliage in September, exactly when your tomatoes are peaking and you want basil most. One healthy plant yields a dozen cuttings in an afternoon. Gardeners in Zone 7 and warmer can run this relay deep into October. Gardeners everywhere can run it indoors, because a basil cutting rooted in late August and potted up on a sunny windowsill is fresh pesto in January, from a plant that cost you nothing. And there is one basil where cuttings are not merely convenient but the only option that exists, and it happens to be one of the finest plants in the entire herb world. African blue basil is a sterile hybrid. It produces no viable seed, ever, which means every African blue plant in existence, every single one, came from a cutting. It grows into a 3-foot shrub of purple-veined, intensely aromatic foliage, blooms nonstop for months without turning bitter, because it never sets seed, and bees mob it like nothing else in the garden. Buy it once, or better, take one cutting from a friend's plant with permission, and you can carry that plant forward on your windowsill every winter for the rest of your life. For the classic culinary types, Genovese roots dependably and remains the sweet basil standard, Thai basil with its anise warmth roots just as fast, and lemon basil follows right behind. If any part of the last few minutes was new to you, and for most people the basil trick alone is, do one thing for me right now. Think of the one person you know who spends real money on plants every year. Your neighbor with the flower beds, your sister with the herb pots on the balcony, your father-in-law who buys a flat of annuals every May like clockwork. Send them this video. No message necessary, just the link. This information does not expire when the season ends. It changes how a person gardens permanently, and it is the kind of thing people remember who told them. Then make sure you are subscribed, because the final plant today is the one with the biggest dollar figure attached, and it is not close. Plant number 7, boxwood. We finish with boxwood, and I saved it for last deliberately, because this is where propagation stops being a fun money saver and starts being serious household economics. A single green velvet boxwood in a 2-gallon pot costs $30 to $45 at most American nurseries. A modest foundation planting uses 8 or 10 of them. A low hedge along a front walk can swallow 20. People routinely spend $400 to $800 on boxwood in a single landscaping project, sometimes far more, and every dollar of it is optional if you own one boxwood or know someone who does, and you own a bag of perlite and a jar of rooting hormone. August into early September is the classic window, and I want to be clear that this is not a home gardener approximation of what professionals do. This is precisely the technique wholesale growers use to produce the boxwoods you see at the nursery. You want semi-hardwood cuttings, this year's growth that has firmed and darkened at the base but is still green and flexible toward the tip. Take cuttings 4 to 5 inches long, strip the leaves from the lower 2 inches of stem, then do one thing we have not done on any other plant today. With your thumbnail or the edge of your blade, scrape a thin sliver of bark from one side of the base, a wound about ½ an inch long, shallow, just exposing the pale tissue underneath. That wounding exposes the cambium, the layer where roots initiate, and on harder-stemmed plants like boxwood it measurably improves both the speed and the quantity of rooting. Dip the base in rooting hormone, and with boxwood, do not skip the hormone. On coleus and basil, hormone is a formality. On boxwood, it is the difference between a tray of rooted plants and a tray of green sticks. Insert the cuttings 2 inches deep in your perlite blend. Firm them in, water once to settle, cover, and place in bright shade. Now, the honest part, because I will not sell you a technique without its fine print. Boxwood is the slow train on this list. Where basil roots in a week and coleus in 2, boxwood takes 8 to 12 weeks, sometimes longer. The cuttings will sit there looking absolutely identical for 2 months, and this is where beginners fail, not horticulturally but psychologically. They conclude nothing is happening and throw out trays of cuttings that were 3 weeks from rooting. Nothing visible happening above the surface is what boxwood success looks like. As long as the cutting is green and firm, it is working. A cutting that has failed announces it clearly, browning, dropping leaves, going soft at the base. Green and boring means alive. Cuttings started in August are typically well-rooted by late fall. Overwinter them in a cold frame, an unheated garage with a window, or tucked against the sheltered north side of the house, with leaves mounded around the pots, and in spring, pot them up or line them out in a spare corner of a bed to grow on. In 2 to 3 growing seasons, they are landscape-sized plants. For varieties, green velvet and green gem out of the cold-bred Sheridan hybrids are hardy to zone 5 and hold their color through winter instead of bronzing. Winter gem and wintergreen are the vigorous Korean types, fast-growing, tolerant, and the best choice for hedging on a budget. Do the arithmetic one last time with me, and this time sit with it. 30 cuttings from one mature boxwood is an easy afternoon, and the parent will never show it. At $35 per plant retail, that single afternoon is worth over $1,000 in 3 years, when those cuttings reach the size the nursery sells. There is no other plant in your yard, and honestly not much else in your life, that converts patience into money at that exchange rate. So there is your 7: coleus, Russian sage, butterfly bush, dianthus, sedum, basil, and boxwood. Every one of them is standing in an American backyard right now, yours or a neighbor's, holding stems that want to become new plants next month. Look at the range of what we just covered. A tropical annual, a woody Mediterranean-style perennial, a flowering shrub, a cottage garden classic, a succulent, a kitchen herb, and an evergreen hedge plant. 7 completely different kinds of plants, and one small set of shared principles running underneath all of them. Cut below a node, strip what will be buried. Reduce big leaves, humidity above, air below. Morning harvests, bright shade, never sun under plastic. The tug test, not the pull-out and peak test. Learn those on these 7 plants, and you have not learned 7 plants. You have learned the skill, and the skill transfers to hundreds of species I did not have time to cover today. The whole toolkit, if you are starting from 0, is a jar of rooting hormone powder for a few dollars that will last you years, a bag of perlite blended into quality potting mix, a handful of clear plastic bags or a dollar store humidity dome, and clean scissors. Maybe $15 all in. One rooted boxwood cutting repays the entire kit twice over. Nobody sells this skill at the garden center, and by now you understand why. A gardener who can multiply plants is a gardener who stops being a customer and starts being a grower. The industry is built on the replacement cycle, on frost losses and impulse tables, and the quiet assumption that you will be back every spring with an open wallet. Step outside that cycle once and you never fully step back in, because the skill compounds in a way spending never does. This August's cuttings become next year's stock plants. Next year's stock plants throw more cuttings than you know what to do with. And somewhere along the way, without quite noticing the moment it happened, you become the neighbor other people take cuttings from. And if you have been gardening for decades, if you are in your 50s, 60s, or beyond, hear this part. You have already paid your tuition to the garden center many times over, season after season, replacement after replacement. You have earned a garden that pays you back, not a garden that sends you shopping every May, a garden that hands you plants, on your schedule, for free, from stock you already trust because you have watched it thrive in your own soil. So here is your challenge for next month. Choose 2 plants from today's 7, just 2, based on what is already growing within reach of your back door. When August arrives, take your first cuttings, morning scissors, plastic bag, 20 minutes. Do not agonize over perfection, because the worst possible outcome is a stem that fails to root, which costs you nothing and which the parent plant will replace within a week. The best outcome is that you make your first free plants and start a habit that pays for itself every single season for the rest of your gardening life. Tell me in the comments which 2 you are choosing and what state or hardiness zone you are gardening in. I read every single comment, and they decide what this channel makes next. If today was worth your time, pass it along to one gardener you know. And if you have not subscribed yet, now is the moment.